And it's not about politics, and that's what everybody keeps yapping about. You also see on television, you see stuff that's going on in Mexico, and they talk about the border violence and how bad it is down there, and that they've got RPGs and automatic weapons and everything else. What does that even mean to the average person? A couple of days ago, I had a dad on who has lost his daughter. She was kidnapped. I don't know what happened to her daughter at this point. We're still looking in. He hasn't been able to get answers. There are 70 Americans have been kidnapped right across our border. We go to Ed Hendy now, down in Texas. Ed, how are you, sir?
Doing great, sir. Nice and warm down here in Texas. You should come visit.
Sheesh. Okay, Ed, I want to talk to you. I want to tell you, I want you to tell America what is happening just about 2 miles off of our border right now. And America will give you context on this in a minute. I'll tell you why it's important that you know this. Go ahead.
Well, Texas shares the most border with Mexico of any state. I mean, there's California, Arizona, New Mexico, and then Texas. Texas has got, I think it's around 1,200 miles of border with Mexico. So we've got a significant problem when it comes to the cartel and the drug thugs. Glenn, all of this talk about border security and immigration has been talking about people coming in here to get jobs, construction, landscaping. The guy with a weed eater is not threatening my life. The drug thugs and the cartels are, which is why, Glenn, today in Houston, Texas, and in El Paso, you are twice as likely to be the victim of a violent crime as you are anywhere else in the country. You're twice as likely also to have your car or your house broken into or your car stolen in Houston and in El Paso as you are in the whole country. We have literally allowed the chaos of an open border to allow the thugs to come in and begin to disrupt our lives.
Tell me about what is just across our border from El Paso.
El Paso's sister city is called Ciudad Juarez, and it is not 2 miles. Glenn, from the air, when I've flown into El Paso, Juarez and El Paso look like one big city. There's a ditch that goes through the middle of it. It's no bigger than a ditch, and it has a small fence on one side. That's our border. At nighttime, and when I'll take you there, you'll look out there and you'll think, that's Mexico over there? It looks like the same city. And on the other side of the ditch is one of the most violent cartel wars. Currently, or last year in 2008, there were 1,609 murders by the cartels against other cartel members in a turf war. They were identified. This wasn't two guys arguing over a soccer game or something like that. These were either violent shootings, knifings, decapitations by the dozens that have gone on across the border. This year, we're on track to increase more than 50% the violence from last year. I want to say that again. We're 50% ahead of last year's numbers as of February the 5th. And it gets more violent every day. Last Tuesday, 12 people were murdered in Juarez, all from cartel wars.
Okay. The pictures that you were seeing there, America, those were people that have been murdered. And again, 70 Americans are missing. Ed, I hear from people all the time. They say, oh, Glenn, 70 people being kidnapped on the border that they've been missing forever and nobody's talking about it. Please, that can't be true. If that were true, how come nobody's talking about it? Ed, describe how difficult it is to get news out of this situation. What happens to news people? What happens to honest people that are standing up and saying, hey, I got to let somebody know? What happens to them?
Well, first of all, the people that have done that in the cities of Nuevo Laredo, which is across from Laredo, Texas, or in El Paso, or in Tijuana across from San Diego, the news stations, the TV stations, and the newspapers, their reporters have been murdered for reporting on the cartel murders. I want to say that again. The journalists in Mexico have been murdered. They've been threatened on both sides of the river, on our side as well. That's right. Threats against our journalists and our own police chiefs. They've had police chiefs lasted 1 day on the job in Nuevo Laredo. They had no police chiefs for, I think, 8 months. Finally, this guy said, I'll take the job. He made it 8 hours before he was dead. Okay. This is an out-of-control situation.
Okay. The attitude in Texas, the tension in Texas, and the disenfranchisement, and what this means to the rest of America with Ed Hendy next. Now more with Ed Hendy. Ed is down in Texas, and Ed, we were talking about the violence down the border, and by the way, just an update on our guests in the White House. They met, we have the commander of the USS Cole and one of the fathers of one of the sailors that passed away on the USS Cole. They just met with the president. They were supposed to be escorted right out to our station right out in front of the White House. Somehow or another, they got outside the gate, and now we're trying to get them back into the White House, and it's a little frustrating, but that's the way things go in live television, I guess. So we hope to have them on in a few minutes. In the meantime, we can continue a conversation. Ed, 2 years ago, I was down in Texas, and something life-changing happened to me, or at least perspective-changing. I lived in Texas for a while. I love Texas. Most people misunderstand it. They think, oh, you know, these Texans walk around, you know, with a Cadillac with the horns on it, and they're like, I love my state. Everybody else sucks. That's not the way it is. Texans understand a republic, and it was the only state in the Union that was actually a country before it was a state. And so they understand liberty and everything else. When I was down there about 2 years ago, several people walked up and said, well, when do we take our country back? And this is with George Bush in office. And I said, okay, not anytime soon, thank you. I really, truly, that was the first time I saw disenfranchisement and the coming of real trouble in America. And it was a lot of it was due to the border, because you guys are experiencing this firsthand. What is the mood down in Texas? How much longer does this fuse have to burn with Texas?
Well, there's a number of ways that it begins to intrude in our lives, and to your listeners across the country, they were saying, like, well, what do I really care about what happens in El Paso? Well, you do care if those drug thugs, by the way, who have come across the river and they're in our country, because, you know, frankly, the robbing, the stealing, and the killing is just as good in their city as it is in ours. Second issue, they're bringing over an entire assortment, a basket full of drugs. This isn't just about marijuana and the argument whether it should or not be legal. Glenn, when I was in Laredo last year, we actually found in thousands of vials of a serum used to tranquilize horses. I said, why do they bring this in? They said, well, use it as a date rape drug. So all of these incessant drugs that will destroy your children's lives in Washington, in New York, in Detroit, in Kansas City, in L.A. come through our southern border. So it does matter to you. And then last but not least, frankly, you've got American citizens whose lives are being put in danger, as well as our Border Patrol agents and other peace officers along this border, and it's becoming increasingly violent. Glenn, the biggest challenge we've got, we found out a couple of weeks or a month or so ago that our own government has decided, and frankly now admits, that Mexico is as unstable as Pakistan, and it's possible that Mexico could fail as a nation and become a narco state. What do you do with the 1.7 million people that are in Juarez when the state fails? And there's one thing that's separating them and El Paso, a U.S. city, is a ditch with a fence on it. We're not prepared for the refugee masses that could flood this country.